He stood by them in their storms. He stayed silent when they hurt him. He forgave what should have broken him. And he kept showing up even when his presence was taken for granted. He died for them not because they asked him to, but because he thought loyalty meant giving until there was nothing left to give. He believed that being there for others would somehow earn him a place in their hearts. He was wrong. They didn't cherish him. They used him when he was useful and dismissed him when he was tired. They saw his strength, but not his struggle. They heard his laugh, but ignored his silence. They praised him in public, but forgot him in private, and still he stayed still. He gave still. He kept choosing them every single time, but there comes a moment in every man's life when the silence becomes heavier than words, and the ache of being unseen outweighs the fear of being alone. That moment came to him not with a loud bang, but with quiet realization. It was a night like any other, nothing special about the stars, no storm in the sky, just a stillness that mirrored the hollowness in his chest. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, wondering how long it had been since someone asked if he was okay. He couldn't remember. He thought about all the times he answered calls at 3 a.m., drove miles just to sit beside someone who cried, showed up when no one else did. And now when he was the one crumbling, no one noticed. His phone stayed silent, his door stayed closed, and his heart stayed heavy. And that's when he understood no one was coming to save him. No one was going to give back what he gave. No one was going to hold him like he held others. So he got up, not out of anger, not to prove anything, but because he realized that his worth was never tied to how much pain he could carry for others. It was never about being the strongest for everyone else, while being the weakest for himself. He started doing the hardest thing a man can do. He let go, not in rage, not with bitterness, but with quiet clarity. He stopped chasing people who never looked back. He stopped explaining himself to those committed to misunderstanding him. He stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. He grieved silently for the version of himself that was willing to die for people who wouldn't cross the street for him, and he buried that man with honor, not shame, because that man was pure, that man loved deeply, and he deserved a proper goodbye. What followed wasn't easy. The nights felt longer. The silence was louder. But something started to shift. He began to rebuild, not to impress anyone, but to survive, to breathe again, to feel something real. He started walking alone, not because he liked it, but because it was better than walking with those who drained his soul. He picked up the pieces of his heart, one by one, learning how to live without the hands that once held it. He stopped performing emotional CPR on relationships that had flatlined. He stopped pouring his energy into people who only remembered him when they were empty. He chose peace over people's silence, over chaos, purpose over validation. And in that process, he found something he never expected. He found himself. He found the man behind the loyalty, the man who was never allowed to fall, the man who was always the fixer, the protector, the giver. He met him for the first time, not in the mirror, but in the quiet moments when no one else was around, and he didn't hate what he saw for. Once he saw a man who had bled for people who never even brought bandages. He saw the scars not as weaknesses, but as proof of how far he'd come. And he realized he didn't need anyone's permission to heal. He didn't need anyone to clap for his progress or acknowledge his pain. He just needed space to breathe and courage to keep going. They called him cold when he stopped picking up every call. They said he changed when he stopped tolerating disrespect. They painted him as distant when he stopped being available for their convenience. But he wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. He was finally choosing himself in a world that taught him. Love means sacrifice. He finally understood that real love doesn't require you to destroy yourself. To prove it, he learned that loyalty isn't about dying for someone. It's about choosing people who would live for you too. He learned that outgrowing people isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from what's killing you. And he walked slowly at first, every step heavy with memories, but eventually lighter with truth. He remembered everything not out of resentment, but because he learned from every wound, every silence, every betrayal. And in remembering, he rose not with fire, but with stillness, not with vengeance, but with vision. He no longer needed them to see his worth, because he had already seen it himself. He no longer waited for their return, because he had already arrived at peace. They had their chance. They lost a version of him they'll never find again. A man who would have died for them is gone, in his place stands a man who lives for himself, who walks in purpose, who loves with boundaries, who gives with discernment, and who protects his heart like sacred ground. Now, when they mention his name, it carries a silence. They can't explain, they feel the distance they created. They sense the warmth they'll never feel again. And while they scroll through memories, he walks forward into a life that no longer includes them, not out of cruelty, but out of growth, not because he hates them, but because he finally loves himself. Enough to let go, and as the world keeps spinning, as new faces come and go, he carries one truth deeply embedded in his soul. He would have died for them once, but now he lives without them. And that's the most powerful thing he's ever done. He would have died for them once, not because they asked, not because they deserved it, but because somewhere deep inside his soul, he believed that loyalty meant everything. He thought if he just stayed solid long enough, they'd finally see him. If he kept giving, eventually someone would give back. He thought love meant staying even when it hurt, even when his name wasn't mentioned in rooms he built with his own hands. He never imagined that the ones he loved the most would be the same people who would teach him how to live with empty hands and a bleeding heart. But life has a way of teaching you the hardest lessons through silence and slow pain. And when it hit him, when it really sank in, that no one was ever coming to return what he gave, no one was ever going to match his love, his effort, his sacrifice. It didn't break him, no, it woke him up. He stopped romanticizing pain. He stopped calling it strength to stay in places that emptied him. He realized that love that costs your soul is not love. It's quiet destruction dressed in attachment, and he'd had enough. He started doing the unthinkable. He chose himself. He began cutting ties, not with scissors, but with silence, not out of hate, but because he couldn't afford to keep bleeding for people who weren't even watching him die. He understood finally that no one was clapping for his sacrifices. No one was praying for his healing. No one was checking in on his breaking point while he carried everyone else's weight, so he let go. He didn't announce it. He didn't throw a tantrum. He just left. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and the absence spoke louder than his presence ever did. There were nights he questioned it all, nights he missed their laughter, their presence, their promises. But he reminded himself that those moments were built on his shoulders, and when he crumbled, they walked away. So he stood up on his own for the first time, not out of pride, but because there was no one left to lean on. And that loneliness taught him something he could have never learned in their presence. It taught him resilience. It taught him to be his own safe place. It taught him that peace doesn't come from people. It comes from protecting yourself from the wrong ones. And Slowly, the man who once would have died for everyone began to breathe differently. He no longer rushed to answer messages that once ignored his own. He no longer begged to be understood. He no longer feared losing people who were never really his. He walked into rooms with quieter steps but louder presence, because now he was filled not with desperation to be loved, but with calm, knowing that he loved himself enough to leave. When he wasn't, the world tried to tell him that he became cold, but he wasn't cold. He was careful. He wasn't distant. He was deliberate. He wasn't bitter. He was better, and the glow-up wasn't loud. It was silent. The healing wasn't pretty. It was private, and the comeback wasn't for attention. It was for alignment. He owed himself a version of life where he wasn't the second thought, the backup plan, or the convenient choice. He owed himself a kind of life where he came first, where his heart was protected, where his time was sacred, and his soul was respected. And now when they think of him, when his name crosses their mind, they remember not just the man who gave everything, but the man who finally stopped, the man who put the pieces of his heart back together without anyone's help, the man who built a new version of himself from the ashes they left behind. And while they might wonder why he never came back, the truth is he was never theirs to begin with. He just loved too loudly in places that couldn't echo backs. Oh, he walks forward now, no explanations, no resentment, no need for closure, because the man he is today doesn't need validation from the people who once watched him drown and called it strength. His silence speaks, his presence stings, and his peace is the revenge they'll never understand, because he would have died for them, but now he lives for himself, and that is the most powerful thing he's ever done.